Long before Sparta became a name people feared, Laconia looked small and exposed. A few villages sat along the Herodotus River, separated by fields, hills, and habit. Each community handled its own disputes, its own harvest, its own raids. But the land did not make life easy. Thin soil and limited resources meant a bad season carried real risk. In places like this, survival pushed people toward cooperation. Pressure came from every direction. Neighbors competed for grazing land and water. Families needed protection for herds and crops, yet no single village had the strength to guarantee it. When violence flared, it did not stay contained. One feud pulled in cousins, then allies, then whole settlements. Trade and marriage tied communities together, but so did threat. The result was simple. Scattered strength stayed weak, and weakness invited more trouble. Over time, practical choices started to matter more than old boundaries. Villages began to coordinate defense, share leadership, and settle arguments in ways that reduced constant retaliation. What began as temporary cooperation slowly looked like something permanent. People who once identified with a single settlement increasingly acted as part of a larger unit in the Herodotus Valley. Step by step, these communities started to fuse into one growing center, what later generations called Sparta. As the new city took shape, its leaders searched for a way to stop old rivalries from tearing it apart. Power settled into an unusual arrangement. Two kings ruled at the same time, from different royal lines. It sounded like a recipe for conflict, but it acted like a restraint. One king could not easily seize everything. In war, a king led. At home, other officials watched the kings and enforced decisions. Over time, Spartans explained this hardening system through one name, Lycurgus. He was remembered as a lawgiver, whether he existed as one man or as a symbol of reforms. The rules tied citizens to the state before family or wealth. Land and privilege became tightly controlled. Public obedience became a habit, not a request. The message stayed simple and brutal. Sparta survived only if every Spartan accepted limits and lived by them. That choice reshaped daily life. The state pushed austerity, discouraging luxury and making sameness a virtue. Politics, education, and discipline aimed toward one outcome: readiness for war. Men trained, ate, and lived in ways designed to reduce softness and increase cohesion. Individual ambition mattered less than the group's performance. The city did not merely raise soldiers. It reorganized society so that nearly everything served the army, even in peacetime. Sparta did not stay contained in its own valley. It pushed west, toward the richer lands of Messenia, where broad fields promised something Spartan soil could not: steady food. That promise brought war. Not one quick raid, but long, grinding campaigns that demanded endurance and coordination. Victory brought new territory, but it also brought a new problem. Sparta now held a land full of people who did not accept being ruled. To keep Messenia, Sparta needed more than soldiers on a battlefield. It needed control every day, in every harvest. So conquest turned into a system. The conquered communities became helots, an unfree population tied to the land and forced to work it for Spartan benefit. This changed everything at home. Spartan citizens no longer had to farm in the same way. They could train, drill, and live for war. But the numbers never balanced. A small group of Spartans now stood over a much larger helot workforce, and that imbalance ruled Spartan thinking. Fear became policy. Every generation inherited the same calculation. The state survived only if the helots stayed intimidated, divided, and watched. Sparta hardened into a militarized minority, not just preparing to fight enemies abroad, but preparing constantly to suppress the people who fed it. Sparta faced a simple fact. The helots outnumbered the citizens, and fear became policy. So the city reached into life at its very beginning. A newborn did not just belong to a family anymore. It faced judgment. Elders inspected the child and decided if it looked strong enough to serve the state one day. Mercy mattered less than calculation. Sparta needed bodies that endured, and it started selecting for endurance at birth. For those allowed to live, childhood did not unfold in private. At a young age, boys left the household and entered communal groups, watched and shaped by the city. They learned to obey, to move together, and to accept pain without complaint. The point was not education in the broad sense, it was control. Sparta reduced the influence of parents and replaced it with a single instructor, the state always preparing for the next emergency. Over time, this system hardened into something official and permanent. The agoge did not remain a custom or a tradition that varied from family to family. It became an institution. Sparta turned childhood into a public pipeline with clear stages, rules, and expectations. The goal stayed blunt and practical. Produce warriors who feared dishonor more than death, and who would stand firm even when the helots stirred. In Sparta, growing up became a form of service. By adolescence, the boy no longer learned by being told. He learned by enduring. Food stayed scarce on purpose, so his body adapted to emptiness and his mind practiced patience. If he stole to eat, the point was never the theft. The point was whether he moved quietly, planned ahead, and accepted pain without complaint when he failed. Hunger became a lesson. Hardship became normal. Obedience tightened around every hour. Older youths tested him, not with kindness, but with pressure. He followed orders quickly, even when they seemed unfair, because hesitation became a weakness the whole group paid for. Discipline was enforced with sanctioned violence, and the line stayed clear. Suffering was not a breakdown, it was training. The state shaped anger into control and fear into reflex. Then came a darker development, whispered rather than announced. The crypteia appeared. Selected youths sent out to roam and intimidate. It worked like a test and a weapon at the same time. They watched the helots, struck without warning, and proved they could survive alone, cold, hungry, and ruthless. This was not battlefield courage. It was policing through terror, and it hardened the boy into something Sparta could use. Adulthood in Sparta did not begin with freedom. It began with membership. A man entered a mess group, the Syssitia, and his place there mattered as much as any battlefield rank. He ate, trained, and planned with the same circle, night after night. Each member had to bring fixed food contributions from his lot. If he failed, he did not just go hungry, he risked losing his standing. Marriage happened, but it followed Spartan priorities, not romance. Men married late after years of state training, and the home never replaced the barracks. He still slept and ate with his mess, and he visited his wife under rules meant to keep discipline tight and desire controlled. Children mattered, but so did caution. A household could not pull a man away from the group that made him reliable. Even in peacetime, adulthood demanded constant readiness. Exercise, weapons practice, and public tests continued because Sparta feared surprise more than exhaustion. This was the turning point. The Spartan citizen became a permanent soldier. His political identity depended on meeting communal military obligations, paying his mess dues, keeping fitness, obeying orders, showing up when called. Citizenship stopped being a birthright alone. It became something he had to keep earning. A new danger arrived from the east. the Persian Empire pushed into Greek lands, and city-states that often fought each other suddenly faced a larger threat. Some chose submission, others demanded resistance. Sparta stood at the center of that decision, not because it ruled Greece, but because its army carried weight. When Greek leaders argued over who would lead, Spartan steadiness became a kind of anchor. The test came at a place that forced an answer: Thermopylae, a narrow pass that could block a massive invasion. A Spartan king, Leonidas, brought a small force and held the line beside other Greeks, buying time for wider defense. The details mattered less than the message. Discipline did not bend. Retreat did not come. The stand ended in destruction, but the delay changed the war. News of Thermopylae travelled faster than armies. Greeks who had doubted each other now repeated one story. A small band chose duty over life and proved the Persians could be resisted. Sparta gained something it could not forge at home through training alone. It gained a legend shared across Greece. Allies sought Spartan leadership. Enemies feared its resolve. Sparta became a name that carried consequences. The showdown with Athens became a grinding contest called the Peloponnesian War. Sparta looked unbeatable on land, but Athens hid behind its walls and used its navy to keep supplies moving. So the war dragged on. Year after year, raids and counter-raids replaced quick victories. Allies wavered. Money ran short. Even Sparta's strict system faced a new pressure. It had to fight longer than it was built to fight. Sparta adapted, slowly and reluctantly. Instead of chasing one decisive battle, it squeezed Athens by attacking its lifelines and stirring revolts in the Athenian Empire. But this new kind of war demanded something Sparta lacked: cash. Ships, crews, and foreign operations cost real money. Sparta leaned on new resources from outside Greece, especially Persian funding, and it turned victory into an economic project as much as a military one. In the end, Athens broke. Its fleet collapsed, its allies slipped away, and it surrendered. Sparta won the war. It had not finished quickly, and that victory changed everything. For a brief moment, Sparta stood as the dominant power in Greece. But dominance came with a trap. Sparta now had to police former enemies, manage allies, and enforce order across a wide network, an empire it never designed itself to run. In the 4th century BCE, the machine that kept Sparta strong started to break. The number of full citizens shrank year after year. War losses mattered, but the rules of citizenship mattered more. Fewer men could afford the required mess contributions, and without them, they lost status. Land and wealth gathered into fewer hands. The state still demanded perfect soldiers, but it produced fewer of them. Inequality changed everything inside the Spartan system. A small group held the best estates, while more families slipped out of the citizen body entirely. That meant fewer trained hoplites in the main battle line, the core of Spartan power. Sparta tried to act like the old Sparta, but its manpower did not match its reputation. Confidence stayed high. The reality underneath it turned thin and fragile. Then the shock arrived at Leuctra in 371 BCE. The Thebans, led by Epaminondas, met the Spartans in open battle and broke them. It was not a narrow escape or a heroic last stand. It was a clear defeat that everyone in Greece understood. The myth of Spartan invincibility ended in a day. After Leuctra, Spartan military supremacy collapsed, and the social order began a decline that never reversed. Sparta faded as a power, but it did not disappear. It survived as a story people kept retelling, sometimes as warning, sometimes as praise. The place remained on the map, yet the old state machinery no longer ruled the Greek world. What endured was the label, Spartan, a word that got detached from one valley and one people, and then travelled far beyond them. Archaeology later tested that label against the ground itself. Ruins and graves hinted at daily life, but they could not replay the discipline, the fear, or the dependence on helot labour that held the system together. Most of what people thought they knew came through outsiders who admired Sparta's toughness or feared its methods. That mismatch drove modern arguments over what had been real, exaggerated, or carefully left unsaid. Popular culture then took the sharpest parts and turned them into a universal symbol: the perfect warrior, the hard life, the clean certainty of sacrifice. The result felt simple, even heroic, while the costs stayed harder to hold in view. Modern Sparta became bigger than ancient Sparta ever was. It stood in stark contrast to those first small river communities, remembered more for a brutal system than for living power.